Hi, and welcome to the Health Begins with Mom show. I am Dorit Palvanov, your host. On this podcast, I will share insights and interviews on health, parenting, and explore the question of what does it take to thrive as women, wives, and mothers. Now, let's get going with today's episode. Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of the Health Begins with Mom podcast. My name is Dorit Palvanov, your host, and Health Begins with Mom is the place where moms come to learn how they can thrive even in the midst of motherhood and the craziness of parenting and being a mom, how we can still thrive as women, wives, and mothers. Today on the show, we are talking about how to get your sleep back after having a baby, how to soothe the baby. We're also going to talk about the difference between a crying newborn and an older baby, and when is a good time to start sleep training. All of that amazing information we're going to, I'm talking today with Rachael Kullman, who is a sleep coach. But before we get into my interview with Rachael, I just want to remind everybody about a webinar that I'm hosting. I'm hosting it next week, and the topic of the webinar is how to have a healthy meal every night, even when you don't have the time. So this webinar is for you if you need more motivation to prepare healthy meals every day. If you have trouble finding the time to make a healthy meal each night, if you're looking for more recipes of foods your picky eaters will actually eat, if you want to learn how to be more organized, if dinner time is chaotic and stressful for you, if you don't feel like you've established clear boundaries around mealtime and most of the time end up giving in by feeding children treats to make the stress go away and then feel obviously guilty about this. So this webinar is for you if you said yes to any of that. I would love to have you on. I would love to have you join me. I've created 2 time slots for you. One during the day. It's going to be October 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the second one is October 25th, which is a Wednesday, and it's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as well. So I've created 2 time slots, so really no excuses. If you're working during the day, come during the evening. Come hang out with me, learn the strategies, learn the tools, and see how it's done. All right, let's talk about sleep. Sleep is such a crucial component of a healthy body. And in the context of how to thrive as a woman and not only to survive, we really need to talk about sleep. Or more, I think the right way to say is how to get it back. So sleep deprivation is almost guaranteed with motherhood, especially with a newborn. And I find many parents choose to sort of like suffer through this stage in hopes that it will get better soon. However, what ends up happening is eventually these sleep-deprived weeks turn into months and sometimes even years, and you find yourself sleep-deprived for way too long. Sleep is non-negotiable for me. And as a result, I did sleep train all 3 of my girls. And since then, I don't have issues with sleep. Without sleep, we literally cannot function as our entire hormonal system is being thrown off and out of whack, which leads to other health issues. Sleep deprivation also has been linked to health effects such as obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, Alzheimer's, and even cancer. Depression and anxiety disorders are also adversely impacted by lack of sleep. Not only that, lack of sleep leaves you cognitively impaired, which means that you are potentially putting yourself and your baby in danger. We've all heard of the stories of the moms who forget their babies in the car or leave the stove on, etc., etc. Really, this madness is actually preventable, and I personally think you owe it to yourself and to your family. Now, other than having an opportunity to sleep enough hours, in the day, the fact that our kids were sleep trained allowed me and my husband to connect and literally save our marriage. And you know how the trenches of parenthood can corrode even the best of love and romance. So do yourself and your loved ones a favor and hire a sleep coach. And today on the show, I'm talking with Rachael Kullman, who is an infant and child sleep coach and the founder of Sweet Baby Dreams Sleep Coaching. She specializes in responsive and gentle sleep methods, working with children ages newborn to 5 years old. As a mother of 2 lively, active children, Rachael knows what it means to experience sleepless nights and postpartum depression. Her passion is to see families thriving and well-rested by empowering parents with the specific tools they need to encourage healthy sleep habits in their little ones for life. So without further ado, here's my interview with Rachael.
Hi, Rachael. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you about sleep. I feel like, as moms with young kids, this is
such a big topic.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So before we dive into, the more sort of the meat of the show, can you tell the listeners about how and why did you decide to become a sleep coach?
So maybe a little bit of background about myself. I am a New Zealand American, so got a bit of a mix going there. And my husband is from Switzerland. So we live in Switzerland. And it really all started when my daughter was born 4.5 years ago. And she was an unexpected surprise and kind of just entered motherhood with not really knowing what to expect or how to react. And then plus I had only been living in Switzerland for about 1.5 years. And so I didn't have my family, my friends, my whole network, of support. I didn't even know where to buy baby stuff at the shops. Didn't have that many other mom friends because I was quite young having her. And it was just like quite a new, overwhelming situation for me. And then when she was born, I kind of thought, oh, this will be great. She'll sleep a lot at the beginning and whatever, and we'll cruise on through. She had reflux, which burned her esophagus, and it was the silent reflux that it didn't come out. She just would swallow it back down. And so she would scream for hours and hours, and we didn't figure out what it was until she was about 3 months old. And she was in a lot of pain. I was breastfeeding and giving her the pacifier and trying all of the things that, as a new mom, you're kind of told to do to settle your baby. And it just didn't really work very well because she was in pain. And finally we got her on medications. But after that, I was so overwhelmed and just kind of insecure in being a mom because I was like, I don't know how to really look after her very well. That beginning phase, I think, is, it's such an important start. And then because of that, her sleep kind of went out the window. And then, when she was 5 months old, she started waking every 2 hours in the night and not being able to go back to sleep. And, we thought maybe it's her, her pain again in her throat, or, what is it? And we kind of just battled our way through. And I had postpartum depression, low iron levels, battled my way through till she was about 1 year old. And then I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much. I am at my limits. And a friend of mine from New Zealand had a sleep assessment done for her child through a sleep consulting there and said, do it, just try it out. And so we did a sleep coaching with them. And within 3 days and minimal crying, she was sleeping 12 hours through the night. And that was for me just like, it was heaven. I can't tell you how good it was. And from then on, I just knew, with my experience with my daughter, I wanted to give that gift of sleep to other struggling moms and to say, hey, don't wait as long as I did to get help, to encourage them, to get that help earlier and to get their kids on the right track with sleeping. Because I know for me, the sleep deprivation was a huge factor with my depression as well.
So that's why you became a sleep coach.
Awesome.
Yeah. So let's talk about what are some of the main issues that your clients are facing?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I assume most of your clients are families, are
Mm-hmm.
parents of
Mm-hmm.
young children. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the main issues they call you for?
Most of the time it's children that don't nap very well during the day and that sleep really badly at night. So we're talking, babies that only ever sleep half an hour during the day at a time, or, are waking up every 1 to 2 hours in the night, or, maybe a little bit older and coming, less frequently, but still a little bit too much for what the parents can handle. Oftentimes there's sleep associations involved that the parents want to wean off, nursing to sleep or sleeping in the same bed. And they just don't really know, what to do and don't have those tools. And generally the parents are just basically at their limits, kind of like I was, and kind of need some help and like someone to come alongside them and actually, coach them through that. So a lot of the time it's overtiredness. Kids that aren't sleeping very well through the day are actually overtired. And then they don't sleep very well in the night as well. So often we just change up their day schedule, and it helps them a lot.
Yeah. So I also wanted to talk to you about the science of crying, because I've seen online that it's sort of like there are two wings.
Yes.
Some experts say that crying is really healthy for a baby's lungs, and some say that absolutely not. You should not let your baby cry. So can you enlighten us a little bit? Is it true that the crying is healthy for the baby?
I think it depends
how much
on
crying. I guess also how much crying is okay.
I think it depends on the kind of crying, firstly, and the context of the crying. I find myself often kind of split between those two camps, and I feel like I actually want to try to find a middle way, because I feel like, some crying with kids is just normal. They're frustrated or they're tired, and when those stress hormones build up, if they're overtired or overstimulated, crying is actually a release of that emotion, and actually helps them to calm down. It's like when we are frustrated or sad, having a good cry just really makes us feel better, and it actually it gets it out rather than all being bottled in. But I feel with babies, it's also really important that the context of that crying is a safe place, so that it's not, they're not stuck in a room crying for hours by themselves. They're crying with mom and dad being around. Mom and dad can support them and say, hey, we want to hear you. We want to know what you're feeling. But allowing them to actually have that space to express their emotions and express their feeling, because crying is the form of communication that babies have. I mean, until they can talk, right? Like, they're wet, they're hungry, or they're tired, all of those things. It's like, I'm going to cry. And there also, when I work with, kids in sleep training or sleep coaching, there are often tears, because, we're changing their sleep environment. We're changing what they know. And it's just that reaction of, I don't know what's going on right now. I feel a little bit insecure. And so they cry. And I always encourage parents, I feel like there's a lot of scaremongering in a way that kind of goes on of like, if your child cries, your attachment to your child will be broken. And I've studied attachment theory, and, attachment is when a child is responded to, and cared for. And that doesn't happen just in the context of sleep. It happens in the context of your whole day, right? When you're feeding it and cuddling it and all of this stuff. And having, a baby may cry for a few minutes or something, but as long as it knows that it's loved and that you're there, that's not going to break the attachment. And there's several studies that have been done on showing, psychological damage in children that have cried for, longer period of times. But all of those studies have been done in orphanages, often in poorer countries, where children are, they don't have caregivers that they're attached to. And that's completely the opposite context of what we're talking about in a loving and responsive home. So I don't encourage parents to just leave their child for hours crying in a room. That I feel like that's not healthy. But sometimes the parents do need to put their child in a room, leave the room, and then come back in a few minutes once they've been able to calm down too, because sometimes crying does crazy stuff with us too. And for me, it's better if the parents actually leave their child to cry for a few minutes than to put the child in danger of abuse or something that can happen when we're so worked up. So I feel like there has to be a healthy balance that's there.
Yeah. So I love that you're bringing that up, because I can share some of my own experience. I have 3 girls, and I've trained all of them. And I can tell you that I felt, I don't know, as a mother, I felt much more confident when it came to their cry. However, I have to mention, I do have to add that it was much more difficult with my first.
Yes,
it became sort of easier to handle when the second and then the third came along. So I feel like it's much more relevant to first-time parents. But I do want to ask you if you find that there is a difference in terms of the response between mothers and fathers to the crying. Who usually is struggling more with hearing a crying baby? Is it the mother or the father?
It really depends on the family, but I do find that mothers struggle more, I think. And I think that's a natural, I mean, our babies cry and we immediately get, a letdown of breast milk. And, we have this like response thing in us to actually respond and nurture. And I feel like fathers don't always have that, but I've seen it also be exactly the other way around, where the dad is, much more concerned about the baby's crying and can't handle it as much as the mom. But I think more often the mom, but it doesn't always have to be. It depends on their personality and stuff too, I think.
And also we spend much more time with babies.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, some dads do take, absence of, like time off work. But I think most of the time it is us who stay with the baby.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, like you mentioned it before, some of my own, I guess, input on crying and just being human means we have to learn how to cope with emotions. And it is a vital part of the human experience. So like you said, crying is one way of coping with emotional stress, this emotional stress buildup. I do want to ask you, what's the difference between a crying newborn and an older baby? Are there any differences in terms of how we should respond to the cry?
That's a really good question. So, like with newborns, I don't really do any sleep training. It's basically just looking at, getting them on a good kind of day routine, encouraging those good sleep habits from the very beginning so that you prevent overtiredness and actually prevent, as the crying in the first place. But a newborn that cries needs to be responded to immediately because, they're fresh in the world. They don't know really what's going on. And they, scientists have now talked about the 4th trimester, the first 3 months that a baby's in the world, that actually human babies need. They actually would need to stay in the womb 3 months longer than they do because for developmental reasons, but then they wouldn't be able to come out. So, they still need that really close attention and response, and they need to know that their cries are being heard. From like 6 months onwards, a baby can actually, there's changes that happen in the brain to where they can actually learn to cope or learn to adjust their emotions a little bit. They can be a little bit more self-regulating with their emotions, but that kind of only starts from like 5 or 6 months of age. And then of course you get into the kind of the toddler phase where they're actually purposefully using their emotions to influence your behavior, where they're actually, but they only realize that really from, 9 to 12 months of age, that they can actually throw a tantrum and that you're going to react or whatever. So definitely, I think that depending on the age of the child, you definitely have to respond in an appropriate way. And the first 6 months, I say you can't really spoil a baby. You just need to love on them and respond to them and whatever. And then after that, once they're slowly learning that more self-regulating, emotion thing, then you can actually start to work with them a little bit on, sleep kind of things, which may involve a little bit of crying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when, I guess now the question that sort of
mm-hmm.
that I have to ask you is, when is a good time to start sleep training?
Uh-huh.
Which age of the baby?
Uh-huh. That's also a really good question. I think I often wish that people would come to me earlier than they do. I feel like, you leave it to the point of, I can do this by myself, and someday it will get better. And then it doesn't,
When do people usually call you? Like around?
I would say usually between the age of 6 to 18 months. But I've also worked with, 2 and 3-year-olds that are still waking up multiple times a night. Recently I worked with a family, and their 2-year-old was waking every 2 hours in the night to be rocked back to sleep. And they were walking around for hours around their house trying to rock their child back to sleep. And, at that age, the parents were really at their limits. They've been doing that for 2 years. And I feel like if you, like with a newborn, if you can actually slowly work on those things from the very beginning, and if you have a knowledge of how to do that well, I feel like you can actually avoid a lot of problems later down the road. So the earlier that you can manage it, I feel like it's better. Between 6 to 12 months, that's often when sleep kind of goes haywire a little bit. I see a lot of babies. There's actually a developmental milestone between the age of 4 to 6 months where their sleep cycles change, and suddenly a newborn that was sleeping 4 to 6 hours in a row, suddenly they're waking up every 2 hours. And often it's kind of after a couple of months of that people are like, this needs to change, otherwise, we're going to be too tired. So yeah, that's what I would say. Generally earlier than most people do, but if I could, my passion would be to educate women from the very beginning, to get people when they have newborns, so that we can prevent all of those difficulties and the crying and the difficulties later on. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned rocking baby to sleep, and I'm just curious, why is rocking the baby to sleep not a good idea? And maybe you can give us some suggestions in terms of building healthy habits and how we can help to facilitate healthy habits.
Sure. So the reason why rocking to sleep can be an issue, it's not an issue for all babies, but often why I see is children have sleep cycles, and in the night, those are generally like 2 to 3 hours a cycle. And if a child always falls asleep at the beginning of the night or of their sleep cycle with rocking, every time they come into a light sleep phase every 2 to 3 hours, they're going to want that same environment, that same way to get back to sleep as they had at the very beginning. And so, if they're rocked to sleep at the beginning of the night, then that's why this baby was waking up every 2 hours, because that was the only way that she knew how to sleep. And so there we worked gradually with helping her fall asleep by herself. And then she was actually able to resettle herself throughout the night. It was just that she didn't know how. She had never had to do that. And that's why rocking or, nursing to sleep or any kind of sleep association that the baby can't replicate themselves after a certain age can kind of present a sleep difficulty. Yeah.
And so what are some of the things that we can do to help facilitate good sleeping habits?
So I would suggest from 6 to 9 months of age, working with your baby to actually fall asleep more by themselves, more independently, without having the props of nursing to sleep or rocking to sleep, for example, that can also be done in a slow way. What I often do is, if a parent is nursing to sleep, that we start with nursing 80% to sleep and then 60% to sleep. And it's just kind of this gradual, motion towards self-settling, but it's not a forced thing where the baby, suddenly from one day to the next has to self-settle. Things like the day routine is really important, that a child gets enough sleep and not too much sleep during the day. So having an age-appropriate day rhythm with age-appropriate awake times. If a baby is awake too long during the day, they start producing those stress hormones, and that makes it really hard for them to fall asleep and to sleep through. Sleep environment is also something really important that I talk to my clients about. A lot of people don't realize, but melatonin, the hormone that makes us feel sleepy, is only produced in the dark. And so, you have a lot of clients that, maybe are trying to put their child for naps down in a really light room. And it's like, biologically, that's really, really difficult for their child to actually settle and fall asleep. And so just even changing that can really be a big factor. And then the other thing that I often look at is nutrition. Which is your specialty. But nutrition, what babies are eating, when they're eating. After 6 months, breast milk doesn't have all of the nutrients that baby needs. And so making sure that they're getting the important nutrients, especially like protein, iron, zinc, omega-3s, all of those things are really, really important in encouraging good sleep.
Right. And also I find from my own experience, creating a routine, like a bedtime routine, wow, that was crucial for my kids.
Yeah. Having that regularity, having that consistency and the routine, it gives children security. It helps them to know, what's coming. They know that once bath time happens, this and this is going to happen, and then it's bedtime. And having that the same every night or before nap time can be really important too.
Right. Yeah. I remember I'm still bathing my baby. I have an 11-month-old baby, and I bathe her every day, and it's not really to clean her up. It's just to sort of, I guess, trigger that, response that, we are going to sleep. And I can tell you, yesterday, for example, it was so hot. So she was born in June. So, that entire stage was done, the sleep training was done in the winter. So I've used a sleep sack to put it to be one of those triggers.
Yeah.
But yesterday was such a hot day, and I couldn't put her in that sleep sack because she was. And so I did it without, and she was completely lost. Like she couldn't see, and I could tell that it was because of that step, putting her in the sack. That was missing for her, and she really struggled with sleep. And eventually she did.
They really are so. I mean, kids are amazingly clever. They connect those dots of like, this happens before bedtime or whatever. And if one of those steps, like you say, is out, then they're a little bit confused.
Yeah, she was definitely off. Yeah. So, as I said, I done sleep training with all my three of my girls, and I know that if it wasn't for my confidence, and honestly, like I don't know where I got the confidence from. I just knew. Oh, well, maybe I can share that. I'm a strong believer that in intentional living, and I remember when just before we started having kids, I read this book, and I think it was by Tracy Hogg. The Secrets of the Baby Whisperer. And I remember there was one sentence that I remember from this whole book, and she said, you have to remember that when the baby comes and joins the family, he joins your family, and he or she has to take your lead. So remember that you are the parents. You are the ones who are creating this framework which where they are going to grow from.
Yes.
So the fact that you are now bringing this life into your home doesn't mean that it's all the baby becomes sort of like the boss and everything has to revolve around them. So I just knew that I do want to still be able to have a good quality of life while having small young kids. So for me it was sort of like, this is just something you have to do. and I do it. So I was very confident when it came to sleep training. However, my husband wasn't like, if it wasn't for me, he would not be able to handle it. So I want to ask you, how do you help parents stay on the same page when it comes to hearing the baby cry or dealing with sleep issues?
It's a great question, because I think, you know, it's so important that you are kind of on the same page, at least to some degree, because if there's too much conflict there, right, between the parents, then it's hard for the parent, you know, that's doing it to actually pull through. I encourage parents to sit down and kind of discuss what their expectations are, you know, with the sleep training, what their wishes are, and to be really honest, you know, like what does the crying do with me emotionally? You know, how does it make me feel? And to kind of have those deep conversations to make some space for that. You know, and maybe one of the spouses, you know, had a bad experience with crying, or, you know, connects it with something kind of negative. And so kind of to get to the root issues there and to actually talk that through. And I often say, you know, like, don't make a decision now, just go away and talk together about what you want your approach to be, because when you guys can create an approach that's for your family, your baby's going to feel that calm and that security, and is going to respond way better than if it's kind of out of whack.
But Rachael, from the families that I've worked with, I know how difficult it is. This blame game, playing this blame game, you know, it's your responsibility, and like, we don't really talk about that.
Yeah,
but there is, like you said, there are certain expectations that we, you know, the husband expects from the wife, or the wife expects from the husband, and, you know, we don't talk about it, and it becomes this vicious and toxic cycle. And on top of that, baby not sleeping, it can create,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Totally. And I mean, I'm not specialized, you know, in you know, marriage counseling or couples, you know, therapy, or working out stuff if they have issues to work through and stuff like that. I think it's really important that we do talk about those nitty-gritty things, and if we need help to do that, then sometimes it can be helpful to get an outside kind of perspective or person to come in and help.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely great value in bringing a third party who is objective and sort of like positioned as the expert in that field, especially for men. I think I think all women, I think all my clients, almost 100% of them would say, would even consider sleep consultant as somebody who they, you know, for sure. You know, next time, if this doesn't happen, I'm calling a sleep consultant. And but it's different for our husbands.
Yes.
So definitely, I think.
Yes. I mean, I had someone call me recently, and she's like, you know, my husband's not quite sure. He thinks it's gonna, you know, get better really soon. So I told him I want to wait 2 weeks, and if it doesn't get better by then, you know, I want to get your help. And he was okay with that. So even having those like little kind of deals, I guess, together. I mean, a couple of years ago too, I worked with a lady, and she actually waited till her husband was gone for the weekend to dive into it by herself, because she knew that he wasn't super supportive, but she knew that she needed it for her own sanity and for their well-being. And he was pleasantly surprised when he came back after the weekend, and their daughter was sleeping better. So of course, I think it's better if you can do it together. But yeah.
So just to sort of wrap things up, I'm curious, how does it look like for parents to work with you? So, I mean, how many sessions? How does it work?
So often there's kind of, I do a 15-minute free call, and that's generally kind of how I get to know clients. That's usually how we connect first, just to get to know each other and see if it would be a good fit. And then generally I have, my basic package is a full sleep consultant, full sleep plan, 45-minute assessment session, and 2 30-minute support sessions over 1 week, where they're filling out like an activity log every day, so I can see exactly, you know, what's happening throughout the day. So they'll book the package. They fill out an online questionnaire. where I can see kind of, what's actually happening, what the sleep situation is. Then we have our 45-minute first consult where we discuss the plan together. It's really important for me there to include the parents in the discussion and creating of that sleep plan. Like I said, because if they can't stand behind it, they're not going to actually be able to pull it through. So get them involved. And then I write up the plan, send it to them, and then we have a week of support. But that can also, I have other packages, with 2 or 3 weeks of support, or they can also be added at a later date if parents need more one-on-one coaching. That's generally the main thing of what I do. I also sometimes go to families' homes and visit them if need be. But generally I work with people all over the world. I've worked with families in Canada, the States, England, New Zealand, Australia, here in Switzerland. Like most of it I do via Skype and telephone and email. So
let me just stop and say, oh my gosh, you're from Switzerland. This is so awesome. Okay, awesome. That's wonderful. So before we wrap up, there are 4 questions I like to ask all my guests. So this show is all about inspiring mothers to thrive as women. And I like to call it being a goddess. So I'm curious to know, how are you being a goddess in your own life? How do you take care of yourself, your soul, your body? What are some of your non-negotiables?
That's a really good question. I feel like I'm still developing those things, or I feel like it takes a lot of, I have 2 little kids myself, a third actually on the way.
Oh,
congratulations. I feel like it definitely takes a bit of juggling to kind of fit those things in. For me, my lunchtime, when my daughter has her quiet time, my son has his nap, and my lunchtime hour is like my sacred space where I just sit with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and I'm, just for me. We like having, with my husband and I, we try and have a date night every week. That's something that we try and do for us together, I guess. And I would love to actually get up earlier in the morning just to have some space for myself before my kids wake up. With being pregnant at the moment, I'm finding it a little bit tough because I'm super tired. But that's one of those things that actually would be really important to me to get into my schedule. Yeah.
Awesome. And what advice does your now mommy self would have given to your pre-mommy self? I love that pause.
Great question. Ask for help. I think at the beginning, I had this feeling like I've got to do it all by myself to be a great mom. And, with my son, the second time around, I was like, forget that. I'm going to organize people to help, the first month that he's born, to help cook and clean and, and that was great. But ask for help. And just to take myself not so seriously. I think sometimes I'm a perfectionist. I like things to go well, to go right. And sometimes with kids, life is just a little crazy. And I think just there to laugh at myself a bit more, to just take those moments with the kids, even if it's, crazy at dinner time and someone spilled their water, it's okay. Those moments happen, and not to flip out so much, just to take it in my stride. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I'm right there with you. Control freak.
Yeah. Definitely. Kids take that all out the window, I tell you.
Yeah. So I like to keep it real. And I like to show listeners that even though someone, is an expert in one area, they might be struggling with other things. So I want to ask you, what are some of your current challenges as a woman and a mother?
That's great. As a mom, I think I'm struggling. My son is going through this huge tantrum phase. He's just past 2, and I feel like I'm not sure how to respond all the time. He gets on the ground and kicks his hands and feet, and his favorite word is no at the moment, so knowing how to respond there, I feel really overwhelmed sometimes. Also, my husband works full time, and so as a mom that has a business and kids, trying to actually juggle that balance of, when do I get my time to work? What's his time to work? Where do we find time as a family? I find the time management side of things pretty challenging at the moment, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, sister. You're not alone. I think all moms, entrepreneurs are struggling with time.
Yeah.
So my last question is, what are some of your pet peeves?
Pet peeves. I hate it when my husband looks after the kids and when I come home from working and the house isn't tidy. I know that's small, but I'm like, what? Pet peeves. I'm trying to think. Can you give me kind of a couple of examples, like from yourself?
Yeah. So for me, for example, I hate breadcrumbs on the floor. This can honestly, like seriously, this can take the life out of me.
Yeah.
Breadcrumbs on the floor, dishes in the sink. Oh God.
Yeah.
Just like yourself, I'm a control freak. It's true, and I really have to work hard on myself to like intentionally not be or intentionally ignore. So
I think also, like for me with my kids, the food mess is okay, but sometimes with them, they just leave their stuff lying around on the floor, and I feel like I'm constantly kind of picking up, and I'm like, that's frustrating. Totally understand. I think it's just mom stuff, but I think it's great. I think being a mom, it challenges us so much to work on ourselves and to actually become better versions of ourselves. And we have so much from our kids to learn. And I think that's really, if we can learn it, I think it can be really special.
Yeah, we are, first of all, raising ourselves. Then we're raising our kids. And only then can we touch the lives of other people. It's so
for sure.
Yeah. So before I let you go, can you talk a little bit about the blog post that you've written for the Health Begins with Mom website, and also about the freebie that you've included, and also where can people find you, your website, and all of that?
Yep. So the blog post that I've written is kind of a bit of a breakdown about crying in general, and especially for families that maybe, one partner can't handle the crying as much as another. As the other partner can, kind of how they can respond. A little bit about, what we talked about before, about the science of crying and what that actually is, and how to respond. And just the importance of, to listen to our children and to discern what their cries are actually saying. The freebie that I'm offering, it's a 3 steps to healthy sleep. And it basically talks about overtiredness, which is one of the big things that I see with my clients, and kind of just gives an overview of how much sleep kids need at certain ages, and how important that is, and kind of getting routine in for their sleep times. And for connecting with me, my website is www.babysleepcoach.ch. And I'm also on Facebook. I have a Facebook group. I have a Facebook page, but I'm not as active on there because I love connecting with women more one-on-one in my Facebook group. And if you just, in the search thing in Facebook, if you look up Sweet Baby Dreams Community, that's where I hang out most of the time.
Awesome. So, thank you so much, Rachael.
It was so nice to be here.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Health Begins with Mom show. I love hearing from you, so please post your comments and questions over at healthbeginswithmom.com/podcast. If you love the show, please share it on social media and in your real life with other moms who might enjoy this content. And if you have a burning question or topic you'd like me to hit on the show, just drop me a line at dorit@healthbeginswithmom.com. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Much love and many blessings.